Life after my husband's passing was a challenge I never expected to face alone. He left me with two beautiful twin daughters, Olivia and Alisa, who were my entire world. Losing him during their birth felt like an unbearable price to pay, but their tiny hands in mine gave me the strength to move forward. From that day on, I devoted myself entirely to them, determined to be both their mother and father. Olivia, my older daughter by just a few minutes, was always the calm and composed one. She carried herself with a quiet wisdom that often reminded me of her father. Alisa, on the other hand, was her polar opposite, vibrant, expressive, and full of energy that seemed to light up every room she entered. Together, they made my life feel complete, even in the face of unbearable loss. Raising them on my own wasn't easy. Late nights of work, early mornings preparing for their school days, it was a relentless cycle. But I never let myself falter, because their happiness and future were my only priorities. The little moments, like their laughter filling the house or the way they'd hug me after a long day, made every sacrifice worth it. As they grew into young women, now 20 years old, I often marveled at how incredible they had become. Olivia was practical and studious, often acting like the older sister she technically was. Alisa, on the other hand, had a creative spark and a charm that made people naturally gravitate toward her. They were my pride and joy, and I often felt a deep sense of accomplishment knowing I had raised them to be strong, independent women. But lately, I had started noticing subtle changes. They were more secretive, whispering to each other in ways that felt different than before. I brushed it off as them needing privacy. They were adults now, after all. I trusted them, never doubting the bond we shared. That trust, however, would soon be tested. It was a quiet afternoon when I came home early from work, a rare treat. The house was unusually silent at first, but then I heard faint laughter coming from the living room. At first, I smiled, thinking I'd catch them in a moment of sisterly fun. But as I walked closer, something about their tone made me pause. My heart began to race, and a strange unease settled over me. What I saw when I stepped into that room would shake me to my very core. The laughter grew louder as I approached the living room, but it wasn't the kind I was used to. It wasn't light-hearted or playful, it carried an undertone I couldn't quite place. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of maternal instinct and dread pushing me forward. As I stepped closer to the slightly ajar door, I felt the weight of an invisible force holding me back, as if my body knew something my mind hadn't yet grasped. I stopped for a moment, the handle of the door just inches from my hand. I took a deep breath and tried to calm the unease bubbling inside me. You're overthinking again, I told myself. They're adults now. There's nothing to worry about. But even as I thought it, my instinct screamed otherwise. Slowly, I pushed the door open and froze. At first, it didn't register. My daughters were there, but so was someone else. A young man, one I didn't recognize, sat between them. The three of them were too close, their movements too intimate. Time seemed to slow as I took in the scene, Alisa leaning on his shoulder, Olivia's hand brushing his arm. Their expressions weren't those of casual friends, they were charged with something else entirely. Mom. Olivia's voice broke through my paralysis as she turned and saw me standing there. Her face went pale, her eyes wide with panic. Alisa, usually the bold one, shrank back like a scolded child. The young man scrambled to stand, fumbling with his shirt as if it could shield him from my gaze. What is this? My voice was calm, almost eerily so, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. No one answered. Olivia opened her mouth, but no words came out. Alisa clutched a pillow to her chest, her cheeks flushed with shame. I asked you a question, I said, my tone sharper now. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Olivia stepped forward, her voice trembling. Mom, I can explain. Explain? I snapped, cutting her off. Explain what? That you thought this was acceptable? That you'd bring someone into our home and do this? I gestured toward the young man, who stood frozen like a deer caught in headlights. Mom, please, Alisa pleaded, tears streaming down her face. It's not what it looks like. Then tell me what it is, I demanded, my anger rising with every passing second. But neither of them could give me an answer that made sense. Their excuses came out in broken sentences, their voices shaking as they tried to justify the unjustifiable. I turned to the young man, my gaze piercing. "You. Out. Now." He didn't hesitate, grabbing his things and rushing toward the door. As he passed me, I grabbed his arm. "If I ever see you here again," I didn't finish the sentence, but the look in my eyes must have been enough, because he nodded frantically before bolting out of the house. The door closed behind him, leaving me alone with my daughters. I turned back to them, my chest heaving with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I asked, my voice trembling. Olivia, always the stronger one, tried to speak. "Mom, we didn't mean for you to find out like this. It just happened. It just happened," I repeated, incredulous. "Do you even hear yourselves? How could you let this?" I struggled to find the words, my thoughts spiraling in 1,000 directions. "In this house, the home we've built together. How could you disrespect everything we've worked for like this?" Alisa broke down, sobbing into her hands, while Olivia stood stiffly, her tears glistening but unshed. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but all I could do was stare at them. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, confusion, and somewhere deep down, an aching sadness. "Mom, please," Olivia said softly, stepping closer. "We made a mistake. I know we hurt you, but we're still your daughters. Please, don't hate us." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Hate them? No. No matter how angry or hurt I was, I could never hate them. But forgiving them, accepting this, felt impossible at that moment. "I can't do this right now," I said, my voice cracking. "I need time." I turned and left the room, the sound of Alisa's sobs and Olivia's quiet pleas following me up the stairs. When I reached my bedroom, I closed the door and leaned against it, tears streaming down my face. The weight of what I'd just witnessed threatened to crush me. My daughters, my beautiful, bright daughters, had made a choice that I couldn't begin to understand. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling as I replayed what I'd just seen. My mind couldn't make sense of it. My daughters, my Olivia and Alisa, who I had raised to be thoughtful and respectful, how could they do something like this? The anger and betrayal churned in my chest, but underneath it all was something even harder to face, the fear that I had failed them somehow. The sound of muffled crying reached me from downstairs. I knew they were still in the living room, probably comforting each other, trying to figure out what to say to me. A part of me wanted to storm down there and demand answers, but another part, the part of me that was their mother, hesitated. If I lashed out now, I might only drive them further away. And yet, how could I pretend everything was okay after what I'd seen? As the hours passed, the house grew quiet. I didn't know if they had gone to bed or were simply waiting for me to come back down. I couldn't bring myself to face them, not yet. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling into every worst-case scenario. Had I missed the signs? Was this some kind of rebellion, or had I been blind to a deeper issue brewing between them? By morning, I still didn't have answers. I avoided the kitchen, knowing they'd be there, and instead went for a long walk to clear my head. The fresh air helped, but the questions remained, weighing heavy on my heart. How could I begin to address this without breaking our family further? When I returned home, Olivia was waiting for me in the living room. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed red from crying. She stood as soon as she saw me, wringing her hands nervously. "Mom, can we talk?" she asked, her voice small. I nodded reluctantly, sitting down on the couch. Olivia sat across from me, her shoulders hunched as if she were bracing for a blow. "I know we've hurt you," she began, her voice trembling. "What happened yesterday, it wasn't planned. It just happened, and we didn't know how to stop it." Her words struck me like a blow. "You didn't know how to stop it?" I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. "Olivia, do you even understand what you've done? This isn't something you can just brush aside as a mistake." "I know," she said quickly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know it was wrong. But Mom, we weren't thinking. We never meant to hurt you." Before I could respond, Alisa appeared in the doorway, her face just as tear-streaked. She hesitated before walking in, sitting down next to Olivia. "Mom," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. We're sorry. I don't even know how to explain it, but we weren't trying to hurt you. I looked at them, my two daughters who I had loved and nurtured through every challenge life had thrown at us. Their apologies were sincere, but they didn't erase the image burned into my mind. You've shattered my trust, I said finally, my voice trembling. Do you understand that? I trusted you both, and now I don't even know who you are. They both flinched at my words, and for a moment, I regretted being so harsh. But the pain in my chest wouldn't let me soften. I needed them to understand the gravity of what they had done. Mom, please, Olivia said, her voice breaking. Don't give up on us. We're still your daughters. Her words brought tears to my eyes. I wanted to believe her, to believe that we could somehow move past this. But the betrayal felt too fresh, too raw. I need time, I said, standing up. I can't do this right now. As I walked away, I felt their eyes on me, filled with guilt and desperation. I closed myself in my bedroom again, my thoughts swirling. Part of me wanted to push them away, to protect myself from further hurt. But another part, the part of me that loved them unconditionally, knew that wasn't the answer. Over the next few days, the tension in the house was unbearable. I avoided them as much as I could, and they stayed out of my way, their voices hushed whenever I walked into a room. But I could see the weight of their guilt in the way they carried themselves, in the quiet moments when I caught them looking at me with tearful eyes. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, Olivia came in and knelt beside me. Mom, she said softly, her voice trembling. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know how much I love you. We both do. We never meant to hurt you like this. Her words broke something inside me. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I pulled her into a hug, the first one since that terrible afternoon. I love you too, I whispered, my voice shaking. But love doesn't erase what happened. It's going to take time for all of us. Alisa joined us, and for the first time in days, we sat together as a family, holding on to each other in the midst of the storm we'd created. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a fragile, tentative step toward healing. The fragile peace we had found that night didn't last long. While I wanted to believe we were on a path toward healing, the tension in the house lingered like an unspoken weight. Every glance, every strained conversation felt like a reminder of what had happened. I kept telling myself I needed more time to process, but deep down, I knew time wouldn't erase the betrayal I felt. A few days later, I came home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise them with dinner as a small step toward reconciliation. The house was quiet when I walked in, the kind of quiet that made my instincts prickle. I set the groceries down and moved through the house, looking for Olivia and Alisa. When I reached Olivia's room, I heard voices, hushed, urgent. My heart sank. I wasn't ready for another confrontation, but something compelled me to listen. I stood outside the door, straining to make out their words. You don't understand, Olivia. Alisa's voice was filled with panic. She's never going to forgive us. I don't think she even wants to look at us anymore. She will, Olivia said firmly. We just need to give her time. Mom's hurt, but she loves us. She always has. Do you really believe that? After everything we've done? Alisa's voice cracked, and I could hear the tears in her words. Of course I do, Olivia replied, her tone softer now. But we have to be honest with her. She deserves to know the truth. I froze, my mind racing. The truth. What more could there be? Unable to stop myself, I knocked on the door. The voices inside immediately went silent. A moment later, Olivia opened the door, her face pale. Mom, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't hear you come in. I can see that, I said, stepping inside. Alisa was sitting on the bed, her hands twisting in her lap. Both of them looked at me with the same expression, guilt, fear, and something else I couldn't quite place. What's going on? For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally, Olivia took a deep breath and met my eyes. There's more we need to tell you, she said. I folded my arms, trying to steady my breathing. I'm listening. Alisa looked at Olivia, as if begging her to take the lead. Olivia hesitated, then began to speak. That afternoon, It wasn't the first time, she admitted, her voice trembling. It's been going on for a while. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. A while. I repeated, my voice shaking. How long? Olivia hesitated, glancing at Alisa, who was now openly crying. A few months, she said finally. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The betrayal I had felt before now seemed like a shadow compared to this. You lied to me, I said, my voice rising. Every time you looked me in the eye, every time we sat down for dinner, you lied to me. We didn't mean to, Alisa sobbed. It got out of control. We didn't know how to stop. You didn't know how to stop. I repeated, incredulous. You're adults. You knew what you were doing, and you chose to keep doing it. We're sorry, Mom, Olivia said, her voice breaking. We never wanted to hurt you. I shook my head, unable to process their words. You didn't think about me at all, I said, tears streaming down my face. If you had, you never would have done this in the first place. The room was silent except for Alisa's quiet sobs. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls were closing in around me. I turned and walked out, ignoring their pleas for me to come back. I couldn't face them, not now, not like this. I went to my room and closed the door, collapsing onto the bed as the tears came. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal. How could they have done this? How could they have lied to me for so long? But as the hours passed, the initial shock began to fade, replaced by a deeper, more painful realization. They were still my daughters. No matter how much they had hurt me, no matter how much they had broken my trust, I couldn't stop loving them. And that love, as painful as it was, made everything more complicated. The next morning, I found them waiting for me in the living room. They looked exhausted, their faces pale and drawn. Olivia was the first to speak. We know we've hurt you, she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. And we don't expect you to forgive us right away. But we're asking for a chance to make things right. We'll do whatever it takes, Alisa added, her voice barely above a whisper. We just want our family back. I looked at them, my heart aching. Their apologies were genuine, but I knew this wasn't something that could be fixed with words alone. It's going to take time, I said finally. A lot of time. And things might never go back to the way they were. They nodded, their relief evident despite my guarded words. We'll do whatever it takes, Olivia repeated. Over the next few weeks, we began the slow process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy, there were still moments when the pain felt too raw, when I wanted to scream at them all over again. But there were also moments of hope, small glimpses of the bond we had shared before everything fell apart. Healing wasn't a straight line, but it was a journey we were willing to take together. And as I watched my daughters try to make amends, I began to see that love, no matter how battered, could still be the foundation for something new. The days after their confession were heavy with tension. Though we had decided to try and move forward, the weight of what had happened hung over us like a dark cloud. Olivia and Alisa were cautious around me, their once carefree smiles replaced with nervous glances and hesitant movements. I could tell they were trying, but the damage was done, and repairing our family felt like an impossible task. For me, the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the guilt. I found myself questioning every decision I had made as a mother. How had I missed the signs? Had I been too trusting, too focused on being their friend instead of their parent? These questions haunted me, filling every quiet moment with doubt and regret. The house felt different now, quieter and heavier. Conversations were short and strained, as though we were all walking on eggshells. I noticed Olivia stepping up to take on more responsibilities, cooking dinner, tidying the house, but her efforts felt like a desperate attempt to make up for what couldn't be undone. Alisa, meanwhile, spent most of her time in her room. She was always the more emotional one, and I knew she was struggling, but I didn't have the strength to comfort her. I was barely holding myself together. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, I heard a soft knock on the doorframe. It was Olivia. She stepped in cautiously, carrying 2 cups of tea. I thought you might need this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I took the cup from her but didn't say anything. She sat down across from me, her hands wrapped tightly around her own cup. Mom, she began, her voice trembling. "I know I've said it before, but I'm so sorry. I don't even know how to begin fixing this, but I'll do whatever it takes." Her words stirred something in me, a mix of sadness and a glimmer of hope. "It's not just about fixing this," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "It's about rebuilding trust, and that's not something that happens overnight." "I know," she said quickly. "I just want you to know how much we love you. We never meant to hurt you like this." I nodded, tears filling my eyes. "I love you too," I said. "But love doesn't erase what happened. It just helps us survive it." For the first time in days, I felt a small crack in the wall I had built around myself. We sat in silence for a while, sipping our tea, and for a moment, it felt like the smallest step forward. But healing wasn't a straight line. There were still moments of anger, moments when the memory of that day would hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me breathless and furious all over again. During those moments, I struggled to hold back my frustration, and more than once, I lashed out at them. But each time, they met my anger with patience and understanding, never once retaliating. It was as if they knew that this was part of the price they had to pay. Alisa, too, began to come out of her shell. One evening, she knocked on my bedroom door and asked if we could talk. I nodded, and she sat on the edge of the bed, her head bowed. "Mom, I don't know how to move past this," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I hate myself for what I did, and I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself." Her vulnerability took me by surprise, and for the first time, I saw how deeply this had affected her. "Alisa," I said softly, "forgiveness isn't something you can force. It's something that comes with time and understanding. But punishing yourself forever won't help anyone, not you, not me, and not our family." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and I reached out to pull her into a hug. "We'll get through this," I whispered. "It's going to take time, but we'll get through it together." As the weeks turned into months, the cracks in our family slowly began to heal. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I doubted we would ever feel whole again. But Olivia and Alisa continued to show me, through their actions, that they were committed to rebuilding what we had lost. They were more thoughtful, more present, and more willing to take responsibility for their mistakes. One day, as we sat together at the kitchen table, Olivia looked at me and said, "Thank you for not giving up on us, Mom." Her words hit me deeply, and I realized that despite everything, I was grateful we had chosen to face this together. It would never be perfect, and the memory of what had happened would always linger, but we had found a way to move forward. In the end, it wasn't about erasing the past, it was about learning from it, growing from it, and finding strength in the love that had held us together all along. Months passed, and while the pain of what had happened hadn't completely disappeared, it began to dull, making room for something new, understanding. My daughters and I were slowly finding our way back to each other, though the journey was far from easy. The betrayal was still there, lingering in the quiet moments when I found myself alone with my thoughts. But so was the love, steady and unshaken despite everything. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about choosing to move forward, even when the past feels too heavy to bear. Olivia and Alisa had made mistakes, but they were also trying. They showed me, in countless small ways, that they were committed to rebuilding my trust. It wasn't just their words, it was in the way Olivia stepped in to help around the house without being asked, and in the way Alisa started leaving little notes of encouragement for me on the kitchen counter. These gestures didn't erase the hurt, but they reminded me of who they were at their core, two young women trying to find their way, just as I had once tried to find mine. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Olivia turned to me with a hesitant expression. "Mom," she began, her voice quiet but steady, "do you think things will ever go back to the way they were?" I took a moment to think before answering. "No," I said honestly. "Things will never be the same. But that doesn't mean they can't be good again. Sometimes, when things break, they come back stronger if we're willing to do the work." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I want that," she said. "For all of us." "So do I," Alisa added softly, her voice filled with determination. Their words stayed with me long after they'd gone to bed. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope not just for our family, but for myself. I had spent so long carrying the weight of their mistakes that I hadn't stopped to consider my own healing. It was time to let go of the anger and the guilt, to allow myself to move forward as well. Through this experience, I learned that love is more than just a feeling, it's a choice. It's choosing to stay when things get hard, choosing to forgive when the pain feels overwhelming, and choosing to believe in the possibility of a better future. My daughter's actions had hurt me deeply, but they had also taught me something invaluable, that no mistake is too great to overcome when love and understanding are at the center. I also learned the importance of communication, of not waiting until it's too late to address the cracks that inevitably form in any relationship. If I had been more attuned to their struggles, more willing to have difficult conversations, perhaps things would have been different. But regret is a useless burden. What mattered now was what we chose to do with the time we had left. One morning, as the sun streamed through the kitchen window, I watched Olivia and Alisa laughing together over breakfast. Their laughter was different now, softer, more tentative, but genuine nonetheless. It was a reminder that healing doesn't happen all at once, but in moments like these, when love begins to take root again. Before they left for the day, Olivia turned back and hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "I love you too," I replied, my voice steady this time. As the door closed behind them, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but I finally believed we could navigate it together. Because in the end, family isn't about being perfect, it's about showing up, even when it's hard. It's about forgiveness, growth, and the unshakable bond that holds us together, no matter what. If you were in her position, how would you handle such a shocking betrayal? Share your thoughts in the comments below, I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories that explore the complexity of family, love, and forgiveness. Stay tuned, our next story will challenge everything you think you know about trust. You won't want to miss it.